Do not adjust your digital device. What you are about to see and hear may shock and appall you. Join our hosts as they encounter countless thrills, spills, chills, and hilarity as they explore the very weirdest in pop culture. The following media is so strange, so beyond the scope of what is normal, it will make you ask the question, why does this exist? Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Why Does This Exist? I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob.
And today we will be talking about one of the most underrated horror video games of all time. I almost said movie. It almost became a movie. We'll talk about
It
that
did
later.
almost become a movie.
It should have been a movie, but then again, video game movies should probably best remain unmade.
Yeah.
I could see it as a really cool anime, though, like the Castlevania show. That would be fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, Why Does This Exist? We're a show that talks about the weirdest in pop culture, and whether or not we're talking about a video game or a music artist like we just did for Blood Ceremony, a TV show full like In Living Color, or just anything weird out there, like weird products or like odd concepts that may or may not have been intentional, like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Rainbow. We covered that a while back. Episode 60 to be exact. So bear with us on the audio. We've come a long way anyway. You know the drill, what to do. Everything we want you to do is in the descriptions. You want to give us money, great. You want to visit our YouTube channel, that's fine. All that stuff is there. I won't waste your time. You are now about to witness the true strength of street knowledge from a ragtag group of rogues. So let's get on with the goddamn show. Oh, that's the news. Here's the weather, by the way. I botched my own intro after 100 and almost 130 episodes, and I haven't for me to get to a botch. So I did my best, everybody. We're talking about The Suffering. The Suffering is one of the coolest freaking ideas I've ever enjoyed. We'll talk a little bit about the sequel. There's not really too much to add with the sequel, but you do get a nice extra bit in the story. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But The Suffering in itself, this is a video game franchise. You're a death row inmate basically who you're inside a haunted prison, and all sorts of things go bump in the night, and lots of people die.
Yeah.
In a lot of gruesome ways. I love the creatures. That's my favorite thing about the game is just the design of the monsters, which was done by the late great Stan Winston, who did a lot of creature effects for, I believe, Alien, Jurassic Park, and a bunch of others.
Yeah.
Just him and his Creature Factory provided the concepts of the designs and everything, and
Stan Winston was actually one of the biggest proponents of making a film based on The Suffering because he wanted to bring the creatures to life on film. And a really cool thing I think about the creatures is that they're all kind of based on bad things that had happened on the island where the game takes place. There's, the ones they have syringes sticking out of their back, and it's supposed to represent all the prisoners that died via lethal injection.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's these huge bloated guys that are on the beach that kind of represent the there was a slave ship that had crashed on the island 100 years before, and so these were to represent the slavers that left the slaves to die basically.
Yep.
And then
and when they die, the rats crawl out of their bellies, and and those are supposed to be the rats that devoured the slaves in the ship.
Yeah, and then there was witch burnings that happened on the island. So there's these little girls that accuse people of burning. Basically, all of the enemies are based off of punishments for like people that have done wrong on the island, basically.
Yes, like horrible things have happened on this lovely island called Incarnate Island. So,
Yes.
which they looked at it and they said, "Oh, a bunch of fucked up things happened here. Let's put a prison on it."
Yeah.
Because why? Why would anything go wrong?
I will say that the beginning of this game really kind of reminds me of the beginning of Doom 3, which was kind of contemporary with this game. It came out around the same time. But basically, you know,
Also, wasn't Doom 3 also a Midway game?
no,
Okay.
Doom is id Software.
Ah.
Doom 3, you know, you end up you're a Marine that gets stationed on in Mars City, which is owned by the UAE, and like you're like it's your first day on the job, and basically all hell breaks loose, and all these demons come and kill everyone. Well, it's kind of similar.
Naturally.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's kind of similar in this is that it's your first day in the prison, and a bunch of demons come and kill everyone.
I mean, it's not even your first day. It's like the first 10 minutes
Yeah,
that you're
pretty
in
much.
the prison.
Yeah. You get off the
Like,
boat, go to your cell, and then all hell breaks loose.
you barely get to yourself. The thing that's like a little sad is that they really do a good job of like fleshing out a lot of the fellow inmates that are with you,
Yeah.
and the guards a little bit, but they're only alive for like 2 seconds of the game. But you do get like an interesting backstory and a good back and forth of them, and they also somewhat establish who you are, Torque, the protagonist. Yes, the guy's name is Torque.
Yes.
They weren't very good with names. No, we don't really know if that like Torque is probably a street name from like because he has like a long like criminal history, so his street name could have been Torque. But
and it gets more into that in the second game. It explores more of his backstory.
Yeah, right. And I mean, your like wife calls you Torque too, but you know he could have gotten the name on the inside or like something like that, and he just kind of like it kind of just stuck. So
yeah,
but maybe his real name is like Marvin or something like that.
Marvin. Hey, Marvin.
But yeah, so basically, here's the deal. You're Torque. You're a death row inmate. You're going to Incarnate Island. You're going to receive the death penalty, or so you thought. You're there with the worst of the worst. Why? Because you murdered your wife and your two sons, or maybe you didn't. You really don't remember. The memory's kind of fuzzy, and that's kind of the point. The game has a morality system which was very good. Actually, it was very well designed.
And it actually gave you different endings. And, you know, there were other games around that time that had kind of a similar system where, like, you could choose your path based on your choices in the game. But it was still very early on. And this is kind of like it's definitely one of the earlier games to have this kind of system where it actually affects the ending of the game based on if you're good, neutral, or bad.
Right.
So it was, you know, it was definitely pretty innovative for the time. I think the
way that it kept track was also really innovative at the time. And like whenever you did something that was good or bad, you know, you would get a vision of your wife like either berating you or being really nice to you, and like sometimes you would see that in your kids too.
Yeah, well, the ghost of your wife is kind of like the angel on your shoulder when you have a choice to make. And there's also like demon voices that kind of tell you to do bad things. And meanwhile, your wife pleads with you to like do the right thing. So that's, you know, it's kind of like, again, you have multiple choices. And, you know, there's some options that give you all three choices where you could do a good thing, a bad thing, or a neutral thing. And then there's some that only allow you to do a neutral and a bad, or a neutral and a good. So it was really interesting the way they did it, and kind of like dynamic in that way.
Neutral normally involves just walking away, or
basically,
you get too far ahead of the other person and then you like lock them out of being able to being able to help them.
Yeah.
But like the endings are just really interesting. So the bad ending is obvious. We're jumping around a lot, folks, but you know what? This is our show. So the bad ending is the obvious one where you kill your family and, you know, you kill the boat dock guard and you run away and you
Yeah.
disappear into the forest. Also, so the bad voice in Torque's head is it's not just a demon, but it's a demon that you manifest to become, and
Yes.
we'll get into that a little bit later. Um, the the good ending is, well, still a bad ending. Your family's still dead. You don't get them back.
Right, but Torque remembers that it was a bunch of masked guys that came in and killed them, and he and then framed him, which is why
Right.
he
So
he gets
like you
death
were
row.
set up, and
Yeah.
yeah. So you were set up, and like when you get saved by the boat dog guys or whatever, or like they or like the corrections officers, then like one of them just goes, you know what? I know who you are. You got framed. The judge they're looking into, like, the judge just got indicted, or the prosecutor just got indicted on your case. We found all the corruption, so you're going to get a retrial and you'll probably be okay. And then that's it. The neutral ending is really everybody kind of dies by accident, which is not fulfilling at all.
Mhm.
Like the only thing is just where you're like, oh well, at least I didn't do it, but at the same time, like everybody's still dead. So like you kill your wife by a accident because you push her and she hits her head a certain way, and then your son sees, and for some reason your son decides to drown your other son just because, and then throws himself out the window. It like makes zero sense, and you're just kind of sitting there like, what a stupid family.
Yeah.
So that's not good. But anyway, like we said, you turn into a monster. Now, the monster is Torque's rage incarnate, basically. That's his beast incarnate.
Yes.
And from what we can gather in the game, from like some of the context clues and backstories, it helps a little bit more when you get into like the second game, but you can also make enough inferences if you do enough bad things, or if the way that people come up to you at first, some of them to just simply see you.
Mhm.
Your guy apparently has a really bad temper to where like he blacks out during of rage. So we can assume that he becomes this monster. You can unlock that when you find some of the specters on the island. Now, there's a few specters on the island. One of them is like kind of neutral. The other one is like trying to make you embrace your bad side, and the other one tries to help you out a bit. These three guys, they all had something to do with the prison, kind of. So the guy who's like a little bit better is Hector. He was a corrections officer there, but then he like went there because he was an inmate, and then he killed his wife during a conjugal visit because he realized that she wasn't safe.
Mhm.
And it like he tells you the story when you're and like he got the electric chair, so there's electricity all over the place for him.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
kind of implied throughout the story that the reason why he killed his wife is because the prison itself is actually a sentient entity that causes
Yes.
people to do things. Much like
Yes.
the hotel in The Shining. It was actually based off of that, the hotel in The Shining.
Yes, they actually watched The Shining a lot for
Yes.
the inspiration for this movie.
Yeah, video game.
I mean, video game. I keep calling it a movie, but
Well, it
it's
was
a
almost
video
a
game.
movie.
It was almost a movie. My bad.
It was almost a movie, but Midway folded before it could actually make the movie. So
Yeah, I mean, also like nobody really knows what entirely happened to it, so people have just assumed that it just got scrapped, but it was never officially stated. So there's a chance, but probably not.
I doubt it. There's
It's
probably not
very
enough interest
unlikely.
in the suffering. It's kind of an obscure gem. It was pretty popular at the time, but like I don't think it really hasn't like warranted a remake or a re-release. There hasn't really been, people don't really
Other
talk about it anymore.
other than just like an underground cult following, that
Yeah.
like could they like what they needed what they remake, which they could do, but like if they did like a remake of both of the games in one pack, that would be really neat. But I don't see them doing it. Which
No.
we can debate a little bit later, but I don't think that they'll do it.
Well, I think a big
But
part of it was that the sequel, although it was well received by critics, did not sell well.
yeah, I
It
mean, it was a good game. It just people just didn't buy it, and we'll talk about
no.
that in a bit too. But anyway, the second one is the corrections officer Hermes, actually, where he's the gas chamber guy, and he he loved executing inmates or watching them die in the gas chamber. He became obsessed with it to such a degree. He's a real weirdo. He kind of like when you well, we'll talk about the voice acting in a little bit because where it like it's spotty, but like where it's good, it's great, and where
Yeah.
it's like where it's bad, it's not terrible, but it's like it's forgettable.
Yeah.
But all three of these antagonists, I guess you could call them, were like they were all top notch. Then you have well, Hermes, who like it only sounds like he's getting a sick like sexual thrill off of whatever it is that he's doing. He's always like moaning, and I guess it's like to kind of like because he's like a living gas cloud essentially. Because what ended up happening for him to become a spirit is he ended up taking his own life in the gas chamber because he was so obsessed with the gas chamber.
Hmm.
And he just haunts the prison as like a gas specter. I bet he smells. Um, he like, and he's occasionally doing like things for you and to you, but also like he eventually wants you to join him in the gas chamber. You got to like shut the gas chamber off and everything, and then like you kind of free him, I guess. With Hermes, his boss fight, with Hector's boss fight, you have to like turn off all of the electrical circuits and like just kind of free him from like the constant pain that he gets because he's always moaning and getting electrocuted like whenever you see him. So
Mhm.
like you kind of just free him from his curse essentially. And then you have Dr. Killjoy, who is one of my favorite video game characters of all time. He's he is pretty much the reason he might be the most haunted thing of the island. He might be the spirit of the island itself, which is why all of these things are happening. All of the experiments of all the different monsters are due to him.
Mhm.
So he's created all of them. Horus, not Hector. I'm sorry. Horus was the name of the other guy. The electrical fellow. He so Dr. Killjoy essentially is just this mad scientist doctor who is just this crazy doctor who was like the psychiatrist of the prison, and he had way too much time on his hands, and he started performing experiments on the inmates
Mhm.
to just like not really for fun, but he just did everything in the name of science, and he kind of took science way too far just to see what happened in a way, and he ends up creating all of the monsters, which are called the malefactors in the games. And oh, he's a real piece of work, but he's kind of the neutral, right? So like that's the interesting part of all of these antagonists. So like Horus is now I'm saying his name correctly this time. So Horus is obviously like the specter of good of the three antagonists. Hermes is the specter of bad. Um, and Killjoy is kind of in the middle because he's not really like he's not really trying to like get a good or bad outcome. He kind of just does all this messed up stuff just to see what happens.
Mhm.
Um, but he's the one who like who lets your monster roam free when you turn into him. Um, and he also creates this thing called the rebirth machine, which is essential um, to you like beating the game. Like you at the end of the game, you have to fight a few versions of yourself.
Yes.
Like one of the monster, one of just a bad version of like a human form, but you have to be the monster to kill it. And then you have to be like, and then you fight this giant hybrid monster that has like torque attached to it on like as like an umbilical cord or something.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
need to use the rebirth machine to stop it. It's a very easy final boss fight and a little bit of a letdown because of how easy it is.
It's a really
But
coolly designed boss, though. It really
yes,
it looks
it,
really cool.
no, it is a very cool looking boss fight. The only thing is just that it's like sort of a letdown because you're like, oh, I thought it'd be harder. But because like it's far more intimidating than it actually is to play it. I mean, the bosses are fairly easy in this game, and so are the monsters. Like if you just barrel through the game and just didn't like you were just totally neutral and didn't try to help anybody, didn't try to hurt anybody.
Mm.
Like you get so much ammo in this game, and um like painkillers that
Yeah,
you like you could really run through this game within a few short hours.
that was actually a
And
big complaint of a lot of people. I mean, not to say that the game was poorly reviewed, because it wasn't. It was actually very well reviewed.
no,
But
it's a very good game.
one of the main criticisms of the game is that it was billed as a survival horror game, but once you get past pretty much the prison stage, you're basically like a god, which is fair. The suffering kind of falls into this like this subgenre of survival horror where like it's a survival horror game for all the other characters except for you, because you're like this badass fucking like guy that like you get all these weapons and you can just blow the monsters away. And Doom also kind of falls into this where like, you know, all the other little like scientists and marines and everybody else in Doom 3 are like getting their asses handed to them by the demons, but you're of course like, you know, the Doom guy, so you just run through and blow everyone away and like are like this unstoppable force basically, you know. So that's kind of like what was like kind of common at the time. I know the original creator, the game designer Richard Rouse, he actually, for his pitch for the game, he wanted to be basically a stylized horror shooter with frenetic gameplay of Devil May Cry meets the horror setting of Resident Evil and the immersive game world of Half-Life, is how he described it in his pitch. So I think that kind of like fits in here, because you know Devil May Cry is very much like that, where like you're fighting demons and horror monsters, but you're also half demon and a badass, you know. So that's kind of like fits in with this.
Right. The other complaint of this game is also that like because you have so much ammo and like your weapon, like once you get the Tommy gun and the shot, I mean pretty much once you get the shotgun, like you're pretty damn good
Yeah,
to do like whatever and like rip through the game. You really don't need much more than the shotgun. And if once you get the Tommy gun, like the island is your oyster of
yeah,
destruction and death. So like you don't so the issue is that when you're the monster form, it doesn't last for that. It doesn't last a super long amount of damage. That you don't really have that many special attacks. You kind of just have two or three. You kind of just have two. It's just the basic slash and like this pounding thing, but like it doesn't do as much damage as some of the other weapons, and like you don't feel like you're not super powerful as the monster, and also you can't heal as the monster, so
yeah.
it almost defeats the purpose.
Well, it also, the monster, like there is a detractor of using the monster. If you use it for too long, you basically like drain all your health out, and you don't die,
That
but
too.
I think it's implied that basically you lose your mind completely, because like Twerk basically curls up into a ball and just starts crying. So it's essentially like it was kind of like an
What a
insanity
bitch.
meter, somewhat.
Yeah, I think that's what they called it, or that's
Yeah,
like what it's been like dubbed. But that's like the only complaint. Where in the second one is much better.
yeah,
The second one is basically the same game. Just the
yeah,
scenery changes, and it does have more like a more built-in like it has more of a story
yeah.
where like
And
you learn more about Torque, but like it's basically the same game. Your
yeah, they didn't really make
morality,
much change.
like yeah, I think that they improved on certain things
Yeah,
for sure. Um, and they like altered a lot of they gave a couple of new monsters and they altered a lot of like the existing malefactors
yeah,
to like represent like urban city, like just like the streets of Baltimore and just like in an urban environment, or like just like a poor community basically, and like the
yeah,
things that happen in there, where like the mainliners are like more like just regular drug overdoses as opposed
yeah.
to like lethal injection as an example. And they have
Yes.
a couple of other ones. The bosses are interesting in that one, but like there
Well,
isn't too much that really got like it's like I thought that them keeping I thought that they relied too heavily on what they already had on the first game for the second one.
yeah,
And I think there should have been a whole new swath of like different malefactors as
I think
opposed to like reusing a lot of the same ones.
a big part of the problem is that they literally started work on the Suffering 2 literally right after they released the Suffering 1 and pushed it out in a year.
Oh, okay. That would
So
make sense.
they
So they
really
kind of
rushed
had
it
to
out.
reuse things.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
rushed it out.
Well, also Midway was like losing a lot of money left and right, so
Yeah,
like
well,
they
yeah, I
had
think
to
it's
like that's probably part of it because they were probably like, well, the Suffering was successful. Please, we need to do the sequel now.
right. I think that's what they did. Is they figured we kind of caught lightning in a bottle with the Suffering. Let's like ride this wave and put the sequel out right away while it's still fresh in everyone's minds. So they really wanted to get the sequel out there, and incidentally, like that kind of hurt them in the long run because, like I said, the Suffering Ties That Bind wasn't poorly received. It was given average to above average reviews. But I think a big reason why a lot of people didn't buy it and it didn't do well is because people saw it as just a continuation of the first game with really not a lot added. I will say though, one of the cool things about Ties That Bind did that not a lot of games did at the time, and it was not common at all. And I don't know for sure, but it might be honestly one of the first ones that did this. It actually used your save game from the Suffering 1 based on, so whatever ending you had in the first game, it would use your save game from the first one to actually give you a different intro to Suffering 2. So that was actually a pretty cool thing. And you would start off with like, if you got the bad ending in Suffering 1, you would start off with like negative, karma points or whatever in Ties That Bind.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. Oh, the way that you could keep track of the morality in the first one was also interesting. Where like if you went to I think if you went to the pause menu, or if you just like left Torque alone, or maybe both for a minute,
yeah,
and he just did like his standing gesture, I guess you would call it.
yeah.
He would pull out a photo of his wife and children, and if the photo was like bloody, then that would let you know that like your karma is pretty bad.
Yeah.
But if it was a cleaner photo, then it would mean that your karma was good. If it was like kind of dirty, then you were in the middle.
Torque's appearance would also change drastically based on your morality level. If you're really bad morality, you would look like sickly and like skin rotting off almost. Yeah. So whereas like if you were good morality, Torque looks like really muscular and buff and healthy.
For a clean feeling, no matter what. Yeah, I thought that I really liked how they did their morality system in the game, and it was like just really cool. And like we said, the creature designs and everything were really great. I think Stan Winston left after the first one. I think he left towards the end of the first one as they were making it. I don't know why. I don't know if there was a dispute with the studio or the game development or anything, but
he might also just have busy doing other projects.
It could have been that too.
The movies. So.
Oh, what else I was going to say? So also the other thing that's they don't talk about enough for the Suffering, or at least the first one, is the soundtrack, and like the use and like the way that they did the sound design for it, because it won an award for best sound design. And if you watch like one of the featurettes on the disc, like I don't know if you had to beat the game or do any of the collectibles to unlock it, or if it was just there, I forget. But they had a bunch of like little behind the scenes things that were really cool that they showed you. And like one of them was just about the sound design, and the guy that did it, they like let me see if they have something on the sound design guy. Here we go. Eric Aho. He like the way that he would do these things. And like this guy Boyd Post like was the guy who like just kind of proposed this, and they thought about why don't like instead of using just regular instruments, why don't we just build out new instruments out of things that you would find in the prison. So like the interesting thing about the prison is that in most horror video games, the prison will be like a level or two.
Yeah.
Like you'll go through the prison on your way to like wherever the final like area of the game is or anything. But the Suffering largely took place in the prison and on the island surrounding the prison. So it was strictly the haunted prison was the central theme, and it was never explored before or since. So that was probably the coolest part of that game was just this. But the sound design lends itself to it. So what they did with the sound was they thought, why don't we make instruments out of things that we would in a prison, so that you would feel like you were
Yeah.
in the prison all the time. So that you
Yes.
like, and you hear that when you play the game. If like you hear like certain scraping sounds
Hmm.
of like metal poles, and you'd hear the metal clanging in like a rhythmic thing.
Yeah.
When like the I think the splicer is the name of the main mainliner. No, the mainliner is another one. Is the main malefactor. Um, that like you would see like you would instantly get you would be able to make that connection, and you would feel like you were in the prison.
Yeah.
So it was like, and you would know that the monsters are coming when certain things would happen, like you do in every game. But like,
They used a lot of unorthodox instrumentation, like,
yes,
slamming a dumpster against the wall, using compressed air to make it seem like there was like gas, gas escaping for the gas guy.
yep, or
You
like
know,
or
shit like
just
that.
like hollowing out pipes and just like clanging them against like
Hmm.
walls and things. Like, oh, it must have been so much fun to just like do that.
Yeah. It was almost like doing like Foley, except it was the score itself, not just the sound effects.
Yes, but yeah, it was very similar to Foley.
Yeah.
I guess that was just kind of the style.
Yeah.
But
Well, it
like
worked.
one of them was just like they just had like a bicycle wheel that they just like kept they just like ran the wheel, and they were just scraping objects against the spokes. Like they really got really innovative with stuff like this. So like I guess if you listen to like ambient dark music, then that you would kind of like figure then this is kind of like where you would categorize the Sufferings like musical storm.
Yeah.
But it was just really neat how like how they came up to how they like came up with this idea.
Yeah.
Or like whenever you were like dealing with Horus, um, you were like they like laced the battle music with like electric currents,
Yeah.
so like you could really it really captured where you were,
Yeah.
which I don't know how many other games really have tried this approach. So it was really unique, and really cool.
There was
Uh,
one more thing I wanted to say about the morality system is that it was actually really unique for to have it in a game like this that was like an action horror game, because usually when you saw games with the morality system it was usually like RPGs and stuff like that, like
right.
Knights of the Old Republic, that kind of thing, where you could choose to do light side or dark side things. It was never really in a it wasn't common to have it in like first person shooters or action games. So that was another like I think you had it in like what was that, Shadow the Hedgehog kind of did a little bit, where you could like choose like to fight with like the good guys or fight against them in each level, and that would kind of give you a different ending. But that wasn't like I don't think it was as robust as this was.
Mm. That's really cool. I didn't know that. So they tried to do so, like we said, they tried to do the suffering, the suffering movie, and honestly, this was going to be like midway in MTV Films, so it probably would have been terrible. I think the only thing that would have been good would have been like the creature effects and the practical effects.
Yeah.
So it's probably better. It's probably for the best that this didn't happen. But
Yeah.
it would be, like I said, if they, the best case scenario is that they do some kind of anime like Castlevania, and it would probably, or like Dead Space, and it would probably be really cool.
I could have seen it being an okay movie, but not a good Suffering. Like if it was just called The Suffering and like most people who didn't know that it was based on a video game watched it, it could have been like an okay horror movie. Um,
Not with MTV Films behind it.
no, well, I'm sure it would have been terrible to be based on like the video game. Like I always say, like some of the Resident Evil movies are actually okay, like horror movies, but they just suck because they're supposed to be based on Resident Evil and they barely follow the plot of Resident Evil. So
Mhm.
that's kind of like the problem with them. So like Resident Evil Extinction, for example, is actually not bad of a zombie movie. It's just a terrible Resident Evil movie.
Mm. I
If it was
guess.
called something else and not Resident Evil, it would have actually been like a decent movie. I think that probably would have applied to The Suffering if the movie actually got made.
I suppose. I mean, I did like the first Silent Hill movie. The second one I didn't watch, but I heard it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
But the first Silent Hill movie kind of gets like mixed. It kind of gets like a mixed thing. But I always thought that the first Silent Hill was pretty decent, at least
Yeah.
as far as like video game adaptations go.
Yeah.
They've gotten a lot better now. I think they think if it was at least as far as like video game adaptations into TV shows, they've gotten a lot better now.
Yeah. Well, and the
But
Super Mario Brothers movie was actually very good, I thought.
yeah, it was good.
So yeah, I mean it's possible to make a decent video game based thing, media. It's just,
Yeah,
it's got to be done the right way. Like the Castlevania series you mentioned is like done the right way. It was like,
yes,
first of all, it was a series because you really can't tell that story in just a 2-hour movie. And two, it was like a very good studio. It was the animation is great. Everything was good about it, and it was like, and they followed the story. Yeah, they took some liberties with the story because they wanted to tell their own story and not just repeat verbatim the story of Castlevania. But they did it in a way that like was, it kind of honored, it paid tribute to the original games. It wasn't just like, oh, we're gonna do our own thing and screw like the original writers and all that. No, they took it and they're like, okay, we're gonna write our own story, but we're gonna like really pay homage to the originals, and we're gonna like, and pay respect to the original story.
yeah, and and then when we get to anyway, then we get to the ties that bind, which the ties that I mean it does the interesting thing that they also wanted to do with the suffering. I keep saying we'll get to ties that bind, and we never get to it. The the other thing is that they wanted to leave the door open, not for a sequel specifically, but they wanted to leave the door open where like you still had a lot of questions about Torque,
Yeah,
and it's also like, well, is the monster real? Like who like, and if like you get the good ending, then you're like, well, who framed him? What happened to like his other like what happened on like when he was like in other prisons? Because like in the very beginning when the other inmates are like talking about like who Torque was at the other prison or whatever, and like what he did and how he got his reputation, like you don't really know. But also if you play the game twice, like they initially built it so that you could replay the game, and you could play it twice so that you would get like a good ending and then the bad ending. And when you replay the game, it starts off with like an additional like intro level where Torque's being brought into the he's being brought into the prison, but he's going into the yard, and all like the inmates try to like mess with him. So like you kill all the inmates. It's unclear if this is Abbott or if this is what happens to you at Eastern, where like because like one of the guards says that like you like took out a whole cell block of people.
yeah,
Not the guards. One of the other inmates says you took out like a whole block of cell, like a whole cell block, or like you run into other people from Eastern, and like so maybe that extra intro is just like, thanks for playing the first game. Here's what happened here's that thing that happened at Eastern.
yeah,
Um, but we're also left where like we don't know if the monster is even real the Torque transforms into, or if this is just a manifestation of what happens when he blacks out and like how he like personally deals with it. Because it seems like the malefactors everyone else can see, and like all of the other haunted things can be seen by other people. But when Torque is the monster, it seems like they can't see it. Like no one
mhm,
else around him can see the monster.
yeah.
Like they don't react to it or anything. So it seems like the monster could be all in Torque's head, and this could just be like how he deals with what happens
Yeah, there's a
when he
lot
like
left
blacks
ambig
out.
there's a lot left ambiguous to like that kind of like, makes you question what's real and what's not real.
Yeah, which
Um
I think is cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's really cool and kind of like it's almost like a dive into Torque's like psyche and like how he is. Yeah, like he was possibly framed. And that's another thing. It's the ending is kind of ambiguous. Like, yeah, there's 3 different endings based on your morality, but like, what's the real one? They don't tell you, oh, this is the actual real canon ending. Like, all 3 endings could be real. Torque doesn't really know. You know,
Right.
it's based on your morality, but we don't know what actually transpired. So
Right, because
everything's
even if the guard tells you, like, "Oh yeah, you were set up and like your court case was corrupt," that still doesn't mean that he didn't still do it anyway.
right,
Like he
right.
like two things can be true. He could have still done it, but he also could have had a corrupt judge and prosecutor.
Well, and again, it's implied throughout that Torque has a very loose grip on reality because of everything that's happened to him and the fact that he thinks he was framed, or was he framed? We don't know. So, it's very much kind of similar to Leo and Shutter Island, how like
Hmm.
it's kind of left ambiguous as to what actually happened until the very end, and then you kind of realize, oh wait, he was like the crazy person all along. Um, it's
Yeah,
very
which
similar with
I haven't seen that movie in a long. I don't think I've seen that movie since it was in theaters.
Oh wow, that's a
I
great movie. You got to
I
watch it.
forgot all about that one.
Yeah, it was a good one. And it definitely the suffering definitely reminded me a lot of it.
Yeah, and then we finally get to the suffering two ties that bind, which some people think that another complaint of Torque is that he's silent. So like because he doesn't talk, like people like they felt like he didn't resonate with people. But I thought it was fine. I didn't talk, but anyway, the suffering ties that bind, which I love that. I love that they got Michael Clark Duncan for this because his performance like really lends to it. I think a lot of the voiceover got better in this game too. Um,
Yeah.
but we find out that Torque is we find out like a lot more about Torque's past until what kind of made him who he was. It kind of seems like he didn't really have a choice in anything and that he like was destined to just get like he just couldn't change and like he was doomed from the start. Um he he was in like a foster home and he kind of create and like he was in a foster home and he met this guy named Blackmore at like a young age who like basically was like the kingpin drug lord of the air of like Baltimore.
Yeah.
And he kind of got corrupted as at a young age and started working for Blackmore because it seems like Blackmore was kind of maybe a father figure to him and b like the only one who really thought that he like the only one who gave him a chance to do anything besides his wife Carmen.
Hmm.
And that turned out so well. So like you find out all these things about Torque and you found out all these things about like where he grew up in Baltimore where it's just like a really rough part of town, so he didn't really like he didn't really have a great chance at like having a normal life. um and all this other stuff happened around him, so he really you really like kind of can like feel for him a little bit more. But they, like I said, they improved on a lot of things, and one of those things was the morality system and definitely the monster. um when like the monster is a lot more powerful in the second game.
Hmm.
So and like also the appearance of the monster changes
Yeah.
depending on your morality. So like if you're like bad, the monster is far more like sinister looking, and also your screen is darker. So like your screen is more like shades of red and yellow
Hmm.
when you become the monster, and when you're good, the monster almost becomes angelic in some ways. He gets like a blue kind of tint, and there's like a bluish aura around the room. um, and your attacks are different too. I think when you're the bad monster, like these like spikes come out of the ground, and then when you're the angel, I think a lot of these like chains come around.
Hmm.
Um, and then neutral, you kind of just look like the monster in the first game. Not too much. I don't think too much changes, but I don't remember too well.
Yeah.
But it's really like the good and evil they changed, and also the final boss that you well one of the boss before the final boss that you face is different depending on your morality. So if you're good, you face this really messed up individual named the Colonel, who was just like he was like a slave hunter essentially. And like he finally gets his, and if you're bad, then you deal with this guy called the Creeper who's hunting you, who was this like pimp turned serial killer who like lived in the sewers. Um, the thing that I think is really interesting with all of the boss fights is the longer that like you can of course just like barrel through the bosses in like 30 seconds, but
Mhm.
if you if you sit and like just kind of like take a minute with the bosses, they'll tell you their entire story and how they came to be this way, like during the boss fight. And some of them will tell you how they died. Like the Creeper will tell you how he died, because he like underground dwelling was the sewers where he would murder like his prostitutes essentially. Um, but and like he had like a contraption of spikes that he like, just had them there, and that's also like kind of sort of part of his design too.
Mhm.
Um, and when and like he tells you that like he fell on his spikes one day because like the Creeper's overweight, so he was old, he couldn't see well, he slipped and fell on his spikes and died, and they never found him, very much like a more terrifying Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
um so that's and he tells you his story and everything, and then of course like and unfortunately, you don't fight Killjoy if it's neutral. That would have been kind of cool if you were the neutral one, but nothing really happens. I think you still may face the Colonel, but like you'll know if you're good or bad on what the monster looks like. You do also like the design of Baltimore is also kind of interesting, and there is like I mean, there's turret levels in most games, and like the turret levels for the most part are just fillers, but um you also find out that like Blackmore is possible that Blackmore was Torque the whole time possibly,
Mhm.
and this also lends itself to the further development that Torque does not have a firm grip on reality.
Yeah.
um so if that's true, which I guess it is, then that means you set yourself up to kill your family. That doesn't really make any sense if you really connect those dots. But
Yeah.
anyway, why would you do that?
Well,
But
that kind of like implies also that, Torque actually just did kill his family even in the good ending.
yes, so that's kind of like silly. But Michael Clark Duncan's performance as Blackmore is like tremendous, and
Yeah.
I mean he was a great actor. So like
Yeah.
anything that he did, he brought like 150% to it. I wish he was still alive. He was just really great in everything.
Yeah.
He was especially great in this, and I think at the time, I mean now you see celebrities in video games all the time, but in like 2004, 2005, even in like God of War 2, he's in it, and like he was doing a lot of video games at this time, and you didn't really see a whole lot of like big celebrities like doing this. If
Yeah.
a celebrity like was doing a video game, it might have been like because they couldn't really get anything else at the time, but
Or it
like
was it was like the top of the top AAA games, like
right,
the Elder Scrolls
right, or
Oblivion
like
featured
right, or like
Patrick Stewart and
Ray Liotta being in Vice City,
yeah,
like things like that.
Patrick Stewart and Sean Bean in the Elder Scrolls
Hmm.
Oblivion. So yeah, stuff like that. It was not common for top celebrities to be in voicing video game at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Did Michael Duncan had kids? I feel like if he had kids, he probably that's probably why he did it.
I have no idea.
Let me see if he had children. No, he didn't have any children.
Oh, okay.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
He looks like he looks like a family man. Like, look at that smile.
Uh,
Ah, poor fella. Yeah, he should have had children. I feel like he would have had a really nice time. Anyway, he oh my god, he was dating that woman Omarosa from The Apprentice. That is
yeah,
strange.
apparently.
Wow. Oh boy. Well, maybe it's good that they didn't have children. I don't know. Nobody's really too. I don't know. Maybe she was actually a good person in real life, but like on TV, just a bad, just like terrible. She might have just been an actor. Who knows?
Yeah.
But that's pretty crazy. Anyway, so anyway, Michael Clark Duncan was excellent as Blackmore in the second game. But yeah, it is kind of weird that like Torque is so like Blackmore is essentially Tor's id, and the id is and like Blackmore is tired of like being in the background or like being the rage that like does all these things when Torque is like, asleep or like in such a fit of rage where he's the monster in like he's really the monster the entire time, and like just like the monster that Torque transforms into, Blackmore is in his head, but Blackmore is more physical than he is. So also that changes the ending too, like the first game um where like if you do the bad, but it incentivizes you to play it again if you get the bad ending or the neutral, where like in the bad ending, Blackmore overtakes Torque completely.
Mhm.
And there's another woman named Jordan that we meet in the game that like is like could be a potential love interest, and then like we find out at the very end that like her and Blackmore were getting it on the entire time. Um but also like he's like, I took over and you're gonna have to like you can never stop me. We're in total control. So I guess you become a a drug kingpin empire who controls the inner city of Baltimore. And I guess some would say that's a happy ending. The neutral ending is, well, things are unchanged. You can't get rid of him and he can't get rid of you. So you're kind of at a stalemate. And Blackmore says something to that effect where it's like, I couldn't change you and you couldn't stop me. So I guess we'll have to do this dance again.
Mhm.
So, which is fine. And then in the good ending, of course, you erase Blackmore and you finally get rid of him. And that's kind of it. You don't like it's not like the worst thing.
Yeah.
Oh, they did call the monster thing the insanity mode. But yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's like we said, even with like the bad ending, it's not like even with like the good ending, it's still not like the best ending because your family is still like dead.
Mhm.
But it is just really interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't know, they did improve a lot of different things in Ties That Bind, but it really just like we said, it did not do well.
Mhm.
I think now there's a lot of speculation as to why it didn't do well. Like what we said, it was rushed. Um, could have had something to do with it. It wasn't badly reviewed. It just seems like it just maybe it wasn't like marketed well or marketed enough.
I think
I don't know if
that could be it.
I don't know if the funding was really even there.
Yeah, well, and that was the thing, is that Midway was in dire financial straits at the time, and I think they kind of like they probably didn't have the money to fund it. I think a lot of it got out that it was too similar to the first one, that it they didn't and the changes that were made, a lot of people didn't like the fact that you can't carry more than 2 weapons, which was like a thing that it became a thing around like the mid to late 2000s, that all of a sudden games were only allowing you to carry 2 guns. Whereas like previous first person shooters, like back, from the 90s and the early 2000s, you carried like a whole arsenal of weapons on you. And I think that pissed a lot of people off. But I think it just, it probably wasn't different enough or unique enough to warrant people buying a second title for, maybe as an expansion pack for $30 or $25, but not as a full game for $50.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that could have been it too. Like maybe because it wasn't explicitly, some people have speculated because it wasn't explicitly stated the suffering too, that people didn't really know what to make of it, and they
That
like
could be.
did like some people like didn't really like they looked at it and they were like, oh, maybe this is like an add-on or something, or like this is like a small, this isn't that big of a game, and like
Yeah.
combined with like how not a whole lot was changed, they might have been like, oh yeah, maybe it's like a tie-in but not like a direct sequel. So like maybe I'll just skip it and wait for the second one, not realizing that it is the second one.
Yeah.
So that could be it too. Also, what month did this come out? Because that might have a lot to do with it too. In addition to like very like limited marketing
It was
budget.
released in North America in September of 2005.
Oh, I mean, what else? There's not really a whole lot. Like, what else came out in September 2005? I mean, it seems like it's an okay time to put out a horror game. It's next
Well,
to
that
Halloween,
usually
so
doesn't. It's not like movies where like there could be a
no, it
blockbuster
isn't.
that it. Video games are a different beast. It's not like competition really, unless it's like two series that are directly competing with each other, like Call of Duty and Halo or something like that. There's really not a lot of like competition in that regards. That like, oh, this one big video game is gonna like defeat all the others because people just buy multiple video games. It's not like you only could choose to buy one or the other.
Yeah. Oh, the Slave Hunter's boss, by the way, is Copperfield. I confused him with the other. The Colonel is in the first game. Copperfield is in the second one. But anyway.
But yeah, so the Suffering Ties That Bind failed, and actually caused Midway a lot of problems because they actually didn't make their sales goals for the year of 2005, for the fiscal year because of that exact reason, and actually really kind of contributed to the dissolving of Midway eventually. And Surreal Software, the developer, was actually closed shortly after and was absorbed into Monolith Productions, who worked on they've worked on a number of things, including Fear, and Fear 2, and Condemned Criminal Origins. So, all games that kind of might have taken some inspiration from The Suffering. But yeah, unfortunately, The Suffering was kind of the swan song. The Ties That Bind was the swan song of Surreal Software.
It's too bad because
Yeah,
I think if they had enough time, this probably would have been a much better sequel, and
yeah,
like they could have really fleshed out a lot more things. Maybe we would have gotten a full new cast of like malefactors
mm,
as opposed to just like a few new ones and like just a reskin of the old ones essentially. Because
yeah,
I think there was a lot of really cool design space that they did use, but they could have used a lot more, and that just kind of comes down to like they just didn't have enough time.
yeah. I think
But I think this had the potential to be a lot better, and I think it would have just done better if they just called it The Suffering too.
yeah. I mean, they could have still had the subtitle of The Ties That
Yeah,
Bind. They could
no,
have
it
just had
could
The
have been the
Suffering
stuff.
2 Ties That Bind.
Well, that's what I mean. Like if they just threw a two in there, I think it would have just done a lot better.
Yeah, yeah, because then you get the name recognition and people realize, oh, it is a sequel.
Yeah, I mean it's just easier. You might as well throw a two in it.
Yeah,
I mean these days you don't really have to do it too much. Like people have kind of like figured out, okay, this is a direct sequel, but also this is the age of like instant information. So if you really don't know when you find out about this game, then you would have just been like, oh, is it a sequel? And then it would like tell you in 30 seconds, and then you would know, and you would just go to the store and buy it. Where like
yeah,
in 2005, news traveled a bit slower. So, you know, if you found out that it was a sequel, you might have found out like a year later when it was too late for the
yeah,
well, too late for the studio, not too late.
yeah,
So that could have been I think the improvements that they made were in Ties That Bind were a step in the right direction. But like I said, I think they just needed a little bit more time to develop it, and they needed like better, at least just adding a two in the title, and probably a much better marketing budget. Because for the first one, the marketing budget was like obviously much better, but they like they had a demo of the game for like journalists inside of like an allegedly haunted prison, which is really freaking cool.
well, that is interesting.
Yeah. Um, but you couldn't really, but like they didn't do anything like that for the second game. the second game, I think like you maybe heard through like video game magazines that like there was even a game coming out. Because I know that's how I found out. Or like maybe you like walked across a shelf and like, in like a video game store or something and you just happened to see it. But like who knows if you would see it week of or if you would see it like a year later or even, years later. Because at this point, like Midway shuttered was like not too long after. Surreal
Yeah.
Games was pretty much done after this, and Midway kind of just ended up becoming, I guess, they became NetherRealm Studio, where it was just like
Well,
specifically Mortal Kombat in a
yeah,
way.
Warner Brothers Games kind of absorbed everything that
Yeah,
Midway had at the time
yeah.
into its own thing.
So I mean, could they remake it? It would be really cool if they did.
I mean, I would assume
Um,
that Warner Brothers probably still holds the IP for The
Probably,
Suffering.
and it's probably really expensive, like just for no reason. It's probably just expensive just because they're like, well, we just have this IP, so if people want to like do anything with it, like we'll just charge them a bunch of money, or like
Yeah.
or like whatever their average licensing fee or whatever rights fee is. It's probably that. Like they're probably just like, all right, well, like let's just put it in with like a couple of the other ones and
Mhm.
it'll be like the average going rate. It's probably not like obviously you would pay a lot more for like the rights to Mortal Kombat than you would for like the Suffering, but it's probably like too expensive for people to bother. But I think it
Yeah.
would be really cool if they did like a remaster of the Suffering and Ties That Bind. It would also be kind of cool if the original team like just did a spiritual successor. I think that's kind of the best thing that you could hope for right now. And I mean, it also would have been cool if like the suffering was if like the concept of the suffering wasn't just torque, if it was just like if it was just like cosmic like this cosmic like energy that was just like
Mm.
it happened to particularly terrible people, which there is a theory of like the things that cause the malefactors to spring forward in on Carnate Island is Torque's very present because
Yeah.
there is like that supernatural theory where if you like certain the presence of people with certain like dark energies about them could be enough to like awaken like dark spirits.
Uh-huh.
So there's a theory that like Torque's very presence is what sets off the events of the suffering, which I'm fine with that happening. I feel like that like makes perfect sense with the context of that universe.
Yeah.
And especially like the little that we find out about Torque in the beginning. If he is as bad as they say he is, then you could stand to see that like the island was already bad enough as it was, and it just needed that little extra push, and Torque just happens to be that guy. Maybe it didn't have to specifically be Torque to do it. Maybe
Mhm.
somebody else who was like a pretty like horrible person could have set it off, but just Torque happened to be that one that showed up. I don't know, but I kind of like that theory.
Yeah. Could be.
But yeah, like I said, I think it would. I think the best thing that we could hope for is that like the original team, or at least Rouse, gets a bunch of guys together and they like create a spiritual successor to this offering. Maybe they like get it crowdfunded or something. Which even crowdfunding, I don't even know if that's as popular as it once was. I see it a lot in board games, but I don't know if it really happens too much for anything else anymore. You never
Yeah.
really hear about it.
It
Um,
I mean, I think that's really the only way you would because it's such a I don't see Warner Brothers games if they are the ones that actually hold the IP doing anything because it's just not I don't think there's not enough like popular uh call for it, it is very much like a cult game at this point. So I
mhm.
think a lot of people, there's not enough interest for them to like warrant making it themselves. It would have to be some kind of crowdfunded thing or something.
Yeah, I agree. Either that or they just get some like big money mark who's like a huge who happen to be a huge fan of this game. Basically, they need a Tony Khan to just give them like squillions of dollars to just make this thing,
Yeah.
but also make sure that they don't give him any like control other than like an executive producer credit where he could just fuck off and do whatever he wants,
Yeah.
but it doesn't touch the game. Then maybe it would be good. But that's really all I've got to say about that. What have we learned, class, from the suffering? If we've learned nothing else, what have we learned?
What have we learned?
Don't go to prison.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty good thing to not do.
Also, don't murder your family on purpose or by accident. And if you didn't do either of those things, don't make friends with people named Blackmore. They will seriously mess up your life. And if you have a bad imaginary friend, get rid of them. Get rid of them as soon as you can. Just like kick them out of the daycare, whatever you have to do. Don't be friends with bad imaginary friends. They're not good. Also, don't be corrupt. Or also don't live in Baltimore. There's a lot of lessons there. Don't become a corrections officer. That's another good one. I don't know. Don't become a pimp or a serial killer. And if you're already a pimp, don't become a serial killer too. It's bad enough as it is. I don't know. We could probably go on. Don't be a slave trader. Don't accuse people of being witches during Salem witch trials when they're not witches. That's also messed up. Don't live on a deserted island where there's evil, where it's known that evil things happen there. Also, don't become a corrections officer on an island like that. Maybe don't take that job. Maybe be a corrections officer at a low-level security prison in Nebraska, where the worst thing that happens is an evil investment banker like accidentally spills his tea on another investment banker who is just as evil, and they get into a shouting contest about it. That's, I don't know. Or if you're gonna become a corrections officer anywhere or go to prison anywhere, if you feel like you have no other options, maybe do
Well,
it.
I don't think you have a choice to where you're going if you're in prison.
This is true. Maybe become a citizen of like a humane society where hopefully you have better, like where you have like a less strict penalty system so that you can be rehabilitated if you're already in prison. Not that we're not telling you to go to prison. Don't do that ever. We've already covered that.
This is pretty
that was
complicated.
rule number
you have
one.
to somehow become a citizen of a country that like has like better prison system and then also go to prison.
Well, you shouldn't go to prison on purpose. Don't do both of those things with that intention.
Well,
if that happens along the way, well, one, I'm really sorry.
They might just deport you.
Like they'll probably do that, and then you'll wind up on like in like a maximum security prison on a haunted island.
The moral
with,
of the story is just don't go to prison. Period.
Yeah, pretty much. Don't murder your family or go to prison. That's what we're trying to say. This has been The Suffering, and this has been Why Does This Exist? I've been Chris.
And I've been Rob.
And remember, question everything.
Good night.